Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Cameron Walton. Cameron, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate you having me on.
You have an incredible background in TSD, and I guess you're going to explain what TSD is. But before we get started, I would love to have you take a couple minutes and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I think where my journey starts specifically for channel is I've kind of experienced a little bit of all the channels. My start began as a phone salesperson, so I knew the VAR space really well, buying and selling phone systems. And then we pivoted that company. I came on as a partner. We pivoted that company to a UCaaS supplier and found the TSD community and sold through that. So about 15 to 20 years, depending on how you calculate it in kind of the channel ecosystem. And yeah, it's been fun journey.
So I'm going to let you explain a couple of those words you just said, UCaaS, TSD, because our audience may not know what those are. So
yeah, look, the telecom world is full of acronyms, and so you need a book to be able to understand it. UCaaS specifically is unified communication, so it's kind of the voice part of all the telecom and providing voice solutions for businesses. What's interesting is I think a lot of people don't recognize that not all channels are created equal. There's the VAR, the DISTI, MSP channel, and that's what the majority of the world understands. But there's this other channel, I call it the upside down, because it looks a little bit different. If you're a Stranger Things fan, looks a little bit different, but it's a little bit of the same too. It's a distribution model for the SaaS and telco side, where you have trusted advisors and TSDs and then the suppliers of the ecosystem too.
So, I don't have a deep background like you that you do in telco, but I did work for Philips. And the part of the team that I was in, I had a home control product that controlled all of the lighting and other devices. We're very, very early on a Wi-Fi based system, and we competed with the big names like Lutron and others. But that the same group I was part of was also responsible for selling DVRs to, all of the providers like Comcast and others at that time. So my exposure at that time, it's almost 20 years ago. And the big word at that time was triple play, right? So,
Yeah.
so can you kind of walk us through over the last couple of decades? That was like the most, exciting thing, convergence. You could not go to a telco show and not show Triple D how these things are kind of coming together. So can you kind of walk us through what was before, like when it was analog, and then when it came to digital, when the convergence started to happen, how did the so-called the channel or the ecosystem evolve?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story that the way you distribute products has changed probably as dramatic as the product itself. We would sell prem-based phone systems. They would CapEx like they would buy it, right? And then you would pay for phone lines to come into the system, and you would pay long distance and toll-free numbers and all those types of things. And then, late 90s, early 2000s, you started getting into the voice over IP, where voice was translated over internet connection, right? So no longer were you subject to local network and local feel of things. You could work and it was the beginning of the work anywhere kind of movement that we have today, where I could be anywhere in the world and answer and receive phone calls over an internet connection and be just like I'm working at the office. And it was so funny early in the days when that was such a big thing. People were so excited to be answering their desk phones anywhere in the world, and we all just kind of take that for granted. But when voice over IP happened and we could digitize voice, that the model of being able to send it was changing. Instead of owning a system, you put it in the cloud and paid a per seat model. And I think that was the beginning kind of the SaaS movement, where everybody recognized you don't need premise-based equipment anymore. It's all software. Let's change from a CapEx to an OpEx model. And I think that transition happened really, really quickly. In fact, you look back and there's no real phone system providers anymore. They've kind of all disappeared, and the Zooms and the Ring Centrals of the world and Teams have came in and taken over.
Yeah, they all of these guys though, like when you talk about Teams or Zoom and etc., they have a whole backend infrastructure that they rely on, right? So maybe you can kind of deconstruct the value chain from like from the Ma Bells to how they split up, and then how the front end because of that split up, and then how the device manufacturer followed in the analog world, because that disruption actually created a lot more opportunity for device provider because you didn't have a single buyer that was negotiating high volume purchases, all those. I remember at Honeywell we used to have these desk phones that had AT&T stamps on it, and they all looked the same for 10 years. But the moment the bells were split up, then we could see a lot of innovation coming out on the device side, right? So can you kind of walk us through that journey of splitting up that analog, evolution of the ecosystem, therefore the various types of device resellers, integrators, etc., came into the market. Then we'll come into the digital world because everything's again collapsed in a different way.
Yeah, a lot of the world that I spend my time in came from the divestitures of the Bell. So you're right, there was a huge inflection point in technology history, because now with the divestitures, you have CLECs, competitive local exchange carriers, who can now provide the same services AT&T was providing, or back in the Bell systems, right? They could provide them at the same rate, and now there was competition, and that's actually where the TSD ecosystem started, because now you could have third party type companies go out and rate shop for your long distance, right? Yours is $1. Well, hey, I can give it now to you for 50 cents a minute. And that's really where the channel started from, is the beginning of that. What's interesting is over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, everything started to be digitized. Everything started to be competitive. Everything that was on-prem. I think really where that major transition happened is in 9/11, right? From everybody having equipment on site to recognizing that's a huge failure point, to going into the cloud. How do we put it into the cloud? How do we make things redundant and not require our office to be up and running? It was the beginning of the kind of the digital transformation era, and it was no different from phone systems, where instead of having a prem-based phone system on your site, you would reach out to a carrier that had a large multi-tenant type product that could host hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of companies on a single hardware solution, and then tenant it out. And then, they were paying CapEx for the equipment. Of course, they had, phone line and those types of costs, but then they would amortize that over a SaaS model back to the clients. And telco started it. You went into the contact center space, and then you went into the storage space. You see companies like AWS and Azure and those types of companies build cloud-based systems. And I think the big transition came with cybersecurity. We started seeing more of that. And then now we're kind of into the AI era. So it's like one after another, you start to see more and more technology come into a SaaS-based solution.
How did COVID impact? I mean, you talked about 9/11 becoming an inflection point, for distribution of the network went from on-prem to the cloud. What happened with COVID? Did it have an impact on the client side of things, but did it also have a back-end side of things?
Yeah, I mean, it stressed our resources on the telco side. It was the best work from home case study probably ever created, because everybody kind of tried up to that point to really figure out how to do this work from home, work life balance type thing, where hey, I can work from home and then I can work from the office and I can be productive on both sides. And I think for the most part, it was a slow burn and a slow struggle. There was no real push into that. Companies struggled because they couldn't figure out productivity. And then when COVID came and everybody had to go home, the stress tested everybody's network. Do you have the things required in this industry to have productive employees from home? And so, I mean, that's everything, right? It's your ERP system, it's your phone system, it's your, the way that you communicated, and how do you hold meetings, and how do you take customer orders, and everything. What I find so interesting is I felt like with how long COVID lasted, it was probably a couple years, maybe 3 years before people started pushing people. I felt like, hey, this is maybe long enough that we had to figure out how to be productive remotely. I've been working from home for 10 years. And so I learned how to communicate. I learned how to talk. I learned how to get stuff done. And it's not an easy task, but when COVID came and now you're 3 years into doing it, I kind of figured everybody would figure it out. But now you're seeing a lot of the large organizations calling people back into the office. I'm still trying to figure out why. Did we not learn how to do it, or did we not figure out how to be productive in our work from home environments?
So I have a question for you on that very moment. Like, when you think about COVID, right? The first thing we all heard, there were no toilet paper. And then they came around. Then we heard there were no milk, right? There were milk shortages. And then the shortages are a very different reason, right? You can't hoard milk because it has a shelf life, but you can hoard toilet paper. And what I didn't know, and, it was quite fascinating for me being a partner guy, the distribution channel for milk that we buy from grocery store is fundamentally different than the distribution channel for milk the restaurants buy. And apparently a majority of the consumption that was going through restaurant channel, that was literally being dumped into the rivers and ground or whatever they're doing, because they didn't have any bottling or packaging plants to get it to the consumer route, right? And we were consuming a lot more milk because we're at home and because we're not going to restaurant. Did you see an inflection point? And maybe before you get into that, kind of explain the difference between a B2B telco delivery system versus a B2C. Like, how does it change? And did you see any inflection point differences between those two channels of distribution of data?
Yeah, I mean, a business phone system is different because there's just more complexities, right? Like maybe if everybody in your house had their own telephone and a way to directly get to it, it's a whole different story. But with everybody having DIDs, and you have ACD groups and hunt groups and auto attendants and contact center type environments, it's just a much more sophisticated problem. I think what we saw though is the ability to expand. We never had issues. I didn't see many issues with our ability to expand into the new need, right? Because most of the suppliers out there aren't relying necessarily on hardware, although there is some of that, but it's software driven. Like to add licenses when you own the system, you just add licenses, you add users, and you expand with hardware on the back end. But we didn't really run into kind of the processors or the chipset issues until way late into COVID. But for the most part, yeah, the infrastructure held, right? We all went from home. We all could hurry and switch on Teams or switch on Zoom or switch on, whatever UCAS and video platform you had. And there wasn't a lot of issues. I think it was felt more when the suppliers or the providers of those solutions struggled, because now more people were feeling it. But for the most part, yeah, I think we rose to the occasion as a society.
And another, behavior wise, I was having this discussion with our sales team, is that before COVID, if we do a conference call with, potential prospects, most of the time prospects or even customers wouldn't turn their video on. And one of the main behavioral changes that happened with COVID, right? We're all working from home, and therefore at work we turning video on from home, and therefore that carried on. So did it create an additional demand on the infrastructure side? I mean, or was the infrastructure already there?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure was already there. When you go from home, like the consumer grade internet network, look, I have a gigabyte internet connection at my home for what was it, $60 a month. I have a single voice call going down that, right? So the issue wasn't, I don't think, was necessarily the network at that part. That was easy. It was funny though. I remember specifically during COVID time that the company that I was working for sent out a memo that basically said, step up your game and professionalism, right? No tank tops, watch your background, don't be sitting by the pool, so it was what I call a Zoom mullet, right? You were professional up top and party down below in shorts or sweatpants or gym clothes. But yeah, it was a funny transition for people.
So talk to us a little bit about like another habit that changed, and then I'll come back to the infrastructure on the channel side. We didn't have binge watching before COVID, and because right, so it was kind of there, multiple series, but binge watching, like watching, I don't know, 29 hours of some series over a period of 4 days. That was a COVID moment that we kind of carried through. And I would see at night, I would get on calls. We have a team in Asia at 8 or 9 o'clock. Our bandwidth absolutely drop in the neighborhood because everybody's like logged in, right? So the carriers overcame that, of course, pretty quickly. But what was happening in, like, when I go back to the Mabel days, Nortel and Lucent and even Motorola, they were the big back end providers, right? And today, kind of Nortel is kind of there because they bought Lucent and it went through this AT&T and T and all these other things that had happened. These back end data forecasting issue, like how much load the system will have, they have all gone through this up and down, right? If you think about 20 years ago, Level 3 was the name. Like they were building fibers to the home, but they were so far ahead, right? And telco industry has gone through this up and down because they could never forecast. I'm not blaming them because it's the most difficult job to do. You can't forecast 9/11. You can't forecast COVID. You can't forecast binge watching. You kind of know where things would go. So what happens in the back end infrastructure spend wise? How does the part of the ecosystem evolve? And what is the ripple effect? Does the front end also go through these big swings, or the swings are less in the front end because of these big changes?
I can't speak for probably the AT&Ts and stuff of the world, but I could probably speak when I owned my own UCAS company that you know when when you had hardware and equipment failures, it was much more problematic, right? Like when you have a server go down, you have hundreds of clients go down. On the other side, when you had prem-based equipment, when a server went down, one company went down. So I think that's where so much redundancy and so much additional infrastructure had to be put into place because there was such a more pointed single failure point, right? You had to beef up a lot of your hardware and a lot of your infrastructure for an N+1 automatic failover, those types of things, because you are now a major critical part of a business's ecosystem. If your phone system went down 10 years ago, it's probably not as important today with all the online shopping and the way people purchase now. But 10 years ago, when your phone system went down, it was very problematic. And so I think they're both kind of reliant together, right? You have to make sure you have the stuff on site, but I think the major pain points were more felt when the carriers failed than when your internet failed, because also today you have cellular, you have multiple ways of getting outside of your own network compared to where it used to be in the past.
So that's the direction I kind of wanted to go. When you look at the infrastructure 20 years ago, these providers are very, very land based. And then when in some of the carriers that introduced mobile and wireless did not have land based capability, like AT&T versus Comcast, right? And then now we see this evolution of Starlink, satellite-based communication, and which is bringing another level of redundancy. You can't jam it. You can't, there's from a national security wise, right? So if you looked at the macro provider perspective, what was the ecosystem like when it was land like? Then when wireless came in, those, because of voice video data, they kind of merged. And then now satellite is very much coming in, right? Especially in developing countries where they don't have to go through that transition. So what is your take on how these two ecosystems came together, and what can we say maybe about the future when satellite-based communication becomes cheaper and cheaper?
Yeah, I remember when we started first putting in voice over IP phone systems, we would use a DSL connection, so like a 768 DSL connection, and we would put it in and we'd do some ping tests, and sometimes it was great, but as soon as somebody started trying to download something, it would make the voice call terrible. And so then what we did is we said, okay, you need two DSL connections. We'll stick voice over the one and then data over the other. And then when the carrier had a problem, they were still down completely. And then, right, the next solution was, okay, we'll put in a wireless connection, and then we'll put in a data line connection, and then that's where all the SD WAN started coming in, so you could start traversing over the carriers based on what had the best signal. And then now Starlink and satellites coming in, it's still not super great for voice, latency super high. But I think as we as an economy, as a human race, become more and more reliable on our digital infrastructure, I think the goal is to expand that and try to become as reliable as possible. Downtime is painful. Business happens fast. Transitions and transactions go somewhere really quick when you can't get meat. There's so much noise and opportunity out there that everybody's just trying to find a way to progress and be further ahead of their competition by providing and having the best infrastructure to help them solve and be more available for the client base.
So I'm going to grossly simplify, for some of our audiences, like a telco, sort of delivery network. So you have these sort of fiber people or satellite people that are bringing in backbone for the communication. Then you have these post offices where things are kind of flowing through to disperse the data where the packet should go. And then you have devices on the client side, whatever that is, to render it in whatever form that is, voice, video, data, right? So if I grossly simplify, now overlay a cybersecurity discussion on top of that, the point of attacks are multifold now, right? In the old days, the way the analog worked, unless you literally went into and did some arson, you couldn't take a network down, or there was a flood, right? Today, what do you think is happening with this multi-point distribution? It's a very complex backend network, right? You have Cisco infrastructure, you have Juniper infrastructure, you have Nortel infrastructure, and each have their own, I don't want to say it, but each have their own vulnerabilities, 0-day. And we saw what happened with the Delta incident. It was, amplified by various reasons. And things sit there in the network as a worm for a long period of time, right, before they activate it. So how are the telco ecosystem, which has not dealt with, spam was the big wake-up call saying that, we are responsible for that. And they solved it, right? We didn't solve it at a client level. Telco solved it at the post office level, right? So what is happening on the cybersecurity side in your mind?
Yeah, I heard it the other day where somebody said World War III won't be fought with guns and bombs. It'll be fought through bits and bytes. And in my opinion, I think we're already there, right? There is a world war being fought between good actors and bad actors. People who want to come in and take your money and steal your information and hold you hostage and hold you ransom. And those people who want to transact and do business in the standard societal way where everybody's, uplifted and taken care of. There's a huge war going on right now. I think one of the most exciting things in our channel, in the TSD channel, is us moving into cybersecurity, seeing that the cyber providers, the MDR providers, the EDR providers, anybody who's kind of playing in that space of providing solutions is more or less an arms dealer these days. In my mind, they're providing shields and they're providing the tools needed to protect themselves. It's becoming more and more fascinating, and the more we rely on the digital infrastructure, the more important it is to keep it up and running. You see all sorts of statistics these days about companies who get hit with ransomware disappear within a year because they just can't recover. And so we're in this ecosystem where cyber warfare is becoming a bigger topic. We're all relying more and more on the digital infrastructure and digital conversation. And what's amazing about the TSD ecosystem is it's the one that is out there helping companies be prepared for the future and what's coming, right? They're arming them with the cybersecurity products to protect their business. They're providing them with disaster recovery and backup. They're digitizing them to do business faster with the right data at the right time to make the right decisions, and the infrastructure to get the data where it needs to be at the right time. It's just, in my mind, there couldn't be a better time, especially now. We'll throw in the AI conversation. I don't think there's a more amazing time to be part of a digital revolution than we are right now.
I'm going to come to AI. I definitely want to come to AI, but I want to go back to one word that is being used, in the traditional IT segment called co-sell. And to me, when I think about the word co-sell, the segment that really invented co-sell was telco. That was the bundling segment. You bundled your stuff, you bundled other people's stuff, right? Whether it's AT&T bundling, Panasonic phone as an offer, or whether, you're bundling in, lately it's HBO and other channels on the mobile devices. So talk to us a little bit. I want to go back to the cybersecurity point, because
Okay.
most of the telco are not cybersecurity providers, right? But they have to heavily embed and they have to bundle in for their customers, right? What do you see as the opportunity in the partner space? Is it kind of gone? Is it all fully established, or is it at its infancy, or is it half mature? Like, where is it? So if I'm, because I would like you to kind of define this partner also who is selling these solutions. What portion of their stack is cybersecurity centric today?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects that are really to that point. I think the first one is I look back at my history of seeing the telco industry change. I remember when we first started selling voice over IP, and it was the coolest kind of rave, and everybody wanted to do it. You had to go to one provider to get your soft phone. You had to go to another provider to get your SIP trunks. You had to go to another provider to get your video conferencing. You had to go to another provider for your back end, and it was lots of different things that you had as a customer to bring it together. We don't do that anymore. You go to Zoom or Ring Central, some of the biggest ones, you get a voice over IP seat that covers everything. And usually they throw a physical phone in there if you want one for free. We're in that same transition period in the cybersecurity space, right? You go to one person for your endpoint detection, you go to another person for your MDR, and then you go to another person for this and another person for that. And I think we're starting to see the mergers and acquisitions and the company grow outside of their single point solution or their single thing that they sell to create a more holistic cyber security model. So we're expanding the depth and the breadth of single providers doing that. In my mind, and what I've seen with a lot of cyber providers out there, as they go into these customer base, they have a lot of products. They have what we call tool sprawl. So they have a lot of products because they're thinking, oh crap, I got to protect this and I got to protect that. And here's a solution for this. And now they have overlaps and they have gaps. And so I think the space, this co-sell model, this TSD channel, I think where it really specializes in is can come in and aggregate the different providers for the different solutions and put it together where you have holistic coverage and a roadmap to get from where you're at today to where you really need to be protected in the future. No, if you went from no security to a lot of security, like it gets so expensive, it's probably going to be hard to keep your doors open, right? So there's frameworks, there's all sorts of things you can do for that roadmap, but yeah, it's starting to morph. I think, and the last thing to think about is there's a lot of government compliances out there. You have HIPAA, PCI, HITRUST, like you can go down the line. And there are companies out there trying to figure out how to do that. They don't understand it. They don't know what they do. Cyber insurance companies are coming in and mandating certain requirements, and these companies are confused And so co-sell models, a trusted voice, a trusted relationship, somebody that they know that has done this over and over and over again and has helped multiple companies through this, somebody that they can see has had a successful roadmap, can now go to that person and say, I need help. Come help me do this. I need to work on my business or in my business, and I don't have time to work on my business. Come help me roll that. And I think that's really where the specific kind of co-selling and partner relationships really come in handy.
So if I kind of stay, for a moment on that
Sure.
co-sell opportunity, and let's break it down, grossly simplified. So you have sort of the infrastructure people, fibers and satellites and landlines and copper, whatever that is connecting the junctions or the post offices, right? That sort of
Right.
group of provider. And then you have head-end equipment providers that are connecting data from large amount, and they're processing it, said it should go through this route, it should go through that route, right? And then it ends up, then I'm simplifying their local, junction box and etc. But if I simplify, it's ending up in a device. So if I take these three nodes, and if I take the ecosystem around the nodes, right? The people who lay fiber, people who lay, launch satellites, and then you come to the junction box that laying the equipment, maintaining the equipment, upgrade, and then you have devices on the inside, right? Can you, Cameron, break us down, like, were there different groups of providers before, or is it today the front end is IT channel, back end is still the TSD channel? Like, what happened to the so-called TSD with this convergence that happened at the front end? How far back has it gone into the back end?
Yeah, maybe let me do a quick kind of overview of how the TSD or technology solution distributor kind of works, because I think what gets confusing for most people is they look at how that interacts with the MSP disty world. The TSD ecosystem is a procurement arm only, right? What attracts most suppliers to that community is now I have a variable cost sales model. I, as a SaaS or telco provider, can go out and build a direct sales team and pay them lots of money. And if they sell something, it's great, but I still have to pay them. And so there's a real fixed cost plus a variable cost to it. I think what people are recognizing is in the telco TSD channel, there are go to market motions where I can reduce my fixed costs and have variable costs in a sales model where I don't pay anybody until they sell something, right? So I come in, I sign with the TSD. The TSD has relationships with trusted advisors or partners. And now this flow of exchange of information and revenue can happen to where the trust advisor can go find a bank who needs a new phone system. They come back to the TSD and say, hey, I have this need. Who do you recommend? Hey, I recommend XYZ telco solution. They come in and say, hey, let's talk to the client. We're going to contract directly with that client. And then we're going to pay commissions to the TSD. And then the TSD takes a portion and pays the trusted advisor. And that evergreen commission kind of has built this channel from where it was today, just around long distance and internet, to now. I mean, it's still not all of the tech stack, but it's a good majority of the infrastructure required for people to do businesses.
So when I listen to you, I kind of put a boxer on that. Is it fair to say, is it may not be the last mile, but the few, is that where TSD is, like, when British Telco partner up with AT&T to lay fiber to the ground from East Coast to London, right? Do they go to a channel, or they buy direct from 3M and lay those fiber? Like, where does the channel begin? So-called traditional, multi-point distribution. That's what I'm trying to find out from you.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at AT&T and they have hundreds of different channels, right? Wholesale is one, right? They have their Apex program to where people can come in and resell AT&T on their paper. And so you see a lot of MSPs and aggregators. I'm thinking of companies like I'll do a shout out to AirSpring or Command Link or Granite or some of those type of people who take the fiber that's already in the ground and resell it as kind of that select model, aggregator model. And then now that there's an end user billing platform, right? So AirSpring or Command Link can now contract with somebody using the infrastructure of AT&T. They invoice, they support, they install, they do all of the things except for the sales model. What the TSD model does now takes that line item, that SKU, that product or service, and goes and finds somebody that needs it and then consults with them to find out which one of the suppliers in the ecosystem is going to do it best. Now, there are a lot of people that are the same, but RingCentral is a little bit different than Zoom, and Zoom's a little bit different than Vonage, and Vonage is a little bit different than Dialpad, right? So they're all in the same category, a little bit different. Integrations, how they install, what they provide is all unique and different. And there's a lot of confusion. You look at stats of directors of IT and CIOs, there are so much technology coming at them so fast, so rapidly, that they can't spend their whole life consuming best practices and knowledge of what is the best technology. They're relying on somebody to help them, right? Think of it as like consumer reports for the CIO world. That's what the TSD channel ecosystem provides.
Got it. And so is there a convergence now then going on between the so-called TSD channel and the IT reseller channel or VAR or MSP channel?
Yes, 100%. The first notions of that started, I believe, back when ScanSource bought Intelisys. I think it was 2016, maybe. You may have to correct this if I'm wrong, but I think it was around that time frame, right? So ScanSource said, hey, we have the equipment, we have the hardware. What we don't have is the SaaS recurring revenue model. Let's go out and buy that. And hey, all of our VARs and integrators and stuff can now sell the SaaS and telco. And SaaS and telco can go sell the hardware. And I think for the most part, we can all agree that it didn't happen like we all thought it would. It was really slow. And I think there's several reasons for that. And we can get into that later. But what I think we're starting to see is the TSD model started with internet and long distance, and then it got into UCaaS and CCaaS, and then it started picking up cloud and cybersecurity. The other side, the MSP side, started with network and cloud and cybersecurity, and they're saying, wait, we can sell this, we can sell the network and we can sell the UCaaS and CCaaS as well. So you're starting to see MSPs pick up the telco side, and you're also starting to see the TSD side pick up MSP services, because the MSPs didn't necessarily come in as resellers. A lot of them are coming in as suppliers. So you have companies like Thrive. I'm working with a company right now called CyberLink, where these guys are providing MSP services, so desktop help, network management, all of those types of things, but they're using the TSD ecosystem to be their sales arm and introduce them to end user customers as a variable cost sales model.
So let's kind of build on that. So you talked about the front end. So I broke it down into three parts: infrastructure, fiber, satellite, and then these junction box people, the head-end equipment people. And then you have, distribution from that point to the business, to the home, and then you have applications within the network, right? And what you're saying is that people who sold the pipes, resold the pipes or connections or whatnot, there's a convergence with the application or the network provider. That's where the bundling happening. Can you share a little bit of thought what is happening in the back end of the infrastructure? Because, and I'm going to bring AI into this, if you look at today, the entire AI premise is about the 3P that you're talking about, right? You have to have a data plant, you have to have power, right? And essentially you have to have the pipe, because you're going to pump in this ginormous amount of data, crunch it, and put it back. And then the client architecture is also evolving, because you're going to have a server client-based or cloud client-based AI models, right? Light, heavy, whatever that is. So what is the back end from junction box to the infrastructure? Is it all direct, or is there any channel play involved into that?
Not necessarily in our channel. That most of that type of the suppliers in our channel are the ones that are doing that on the back end, right? The aggregation of services, the bringing together and the bundling of a product, the connectivity, a lot of the wholesalers, right, reaching out and making sure that those things are aggregated and connected together. We don't see a lot of that in our industry. It only comes out in an actual product because we don't do the service or the support. We don't really put things together. We expect the supplier in our community to put that all together. Like there's a product design and development layer, there's a support and invoice layer, and then there's a sales layer. We kind of expect in the TSD ecosystem for that design and the support and install to happen. We're only taking care of that sales layer. So we're seeing it from that junction box forward to the end user.
And when you say a supplier, you mean a service provider like an AT&T or British Telco, etc.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so now let's come back to AI. There's a huge rush to build this backend capacity. And how is this whole ecosystem getting ready for, an unfortunate 9/11 spike or a COVID spike or a binge watching spike, or, like what are they doing from a risk perspective, not from an upside perspective? Do you see any discussions going on in that ecosystem today?
I don't see a lot of how they're planning for growth from a capacity standpoint. The majority of things we see is two aspects. Once again, we're kind of application product facing channels. So there's kind of two rules of thought of how AI really impacts our workplace. One of it is as an overlay product, right? Every product we sell, UCaaS, CCaaS, cybersecurity, cloud, like all of those things are now getting upgraded with some sort of AI component, and they're all different, right? In the UCaaS and CCaaS space, the CX, the customer experience space, I think where we saw it first is we're starting to now enable the company to provide a better augmented experience for the customer calling in. They talk to a chatbot, they can get answers faster. They're not reliant on a person who doesn't know the answer and maybe clunky in their learning of the technology and clunky in the learning of how the systems work. And, maybe they didn't show up on time because they stayed out too late the night before, right? So we saw kind of an increased customer service experience. And that's kind of permeated through all the technology stacks. The other frame of thought on what we really haven't seen, but I think we'll see more of it, is taking what AI is in its essence and helping that particular product be integrated into companies in more of a ChatGPT LLM model. So how do I take AI and its core access of what it can provide and help a company integrate and use AI to help them be better? That's been a slower move currently in our industry.
Speaking of that customer experience, one of the biggest changes that happened, like when I was growing up in New Jersey, a lot of the call centers were in New Jersey. Then there was a big push. The banking sector started to move to the South, right? They would go to Tennessee, they would go to Alabama, they will have lower cost infrastructure, right? And you could see the accent changing, right? Because the call centers had moved out to there. Then, Philippines and India, because of the VoIP, it came around, it shifted to there, right? Now you see, I went through a personal experience last week where I found like there are 3 lines we're paying for iPad tablets that are not active. So first I thought, I got to go into a store. Then I said, well, let me try the bot. So I log into the AT&T bot. I said, I want to cancel my line. Previously, 2 years ago, it didn't mean an option. I had to go to a store.
Yeah.
Gave me a link. I did a 2FA. It gave me a code. I put that in, and your line's canceled. So this bunch of tasks that people did just disappeared, right? So what do you see on the CX side? Because customer support is a big cost for any company, whether it's a small law firm, whether it's a clinic. There's always at the front desk. Do you see applications that are evolving that are real today that small business and mid-sized business are considering to deploy to? Because that's where the labor shortages are too, right? So what do you see happening there?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think number one, an intermediate step that AI is helping with is accent changes, right? So when you go offshore, any country with a heavy accent, there is AI technology that will take that accent and remake it into whatever American made accent you want. So the offshore people are becoming much more productive, and it's easier to offshore because you're not worried about that experience and some of those
And there is
of
no
things.
latency or any of those things. Wow.
Yeah, it's changing. I think the thing that where I think we should all be worried about is understanding what AI is doing to the contact center employee in general, right? Because you didn't have to call somebody and you could use the chatbot, that means that person who was sitting at the seat before is no longer needed. So this AI technology is handling things so well and able to replace some of the easier tasks that some employees did. And so the needs for the contact center employee have reduced. I've heard stories of people going from 600 employees down to 400 employees with just some implementations of this product. And I think we're going to continue to see that. What's up for debate is I don't know if with your extra time that you sat on the couch and did nothing, or did you go find more productive stuff to do? Right? Everybody's talking about AI is going to give us this ability to sit around and do nothing because everything's going to be done for us. But I look back at the invention of the computer. I don't think people work any less hard now that they have a computer. They do more because they can do more and they're required to do more. And I think that the same thing's going to happen with the invention of AI if we're not careful.
I'm very much like you. I'm a huge AI optimist, so I definitely think we're going to create a lot more wealth for everybody in a lot more equal way. We're coming to an end, but I do want to take the last point. So when you think about the next 12 to 18 months, what are the 2 or 3 things excite you the most about this space?
As you said, I'm a huge AI optimist. I love what it's doing. I love what it does for my business. I think what it allows us to do, what our channel is really known for, is the exchange of information and experience, and also the ability to have a great feedback loop, right? These partners, these trusted advisors are in an ecosystem where they're having conversations with end users and they're gathering knowledge. And we can take that back to the suppliers to build products and services to better suit, right? So it's a great ecosystem of information. And I think what AI does is it speeds that up, and we're going to see more and more really cool technology come out. I think we're going to have a better and better experience with interacting with businesses and customers. And I think there's going to be a huge shift between the people who wait too long to do that and those that pick it up fast and provide a great experience. So I'm really excited. I think the rate of which information is shared will continue to increase. And the need for really good people who understand that technology is just going to be greater and greater. So I don't think there's a better time than now to be in a channel or a co-sell ecosystem.
Wow. Well, Cameron, thank you for being here. It's been an amazing conversation. The hour flew by. I would love to have you back. There is so much knowledge in there, and you're witnessing a space that is at front and the center of this whole AI evolution that's happening. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.